why the best Pokemon in Gen 2, Snorlax, is not banned in OU. Snorlax, #1 OU, also #1 in Ubers. So like what
Yeah, that's
why
the
is that?
craziest. That is the craziest thing. It's pretty much the fact that the Ubers are good, but they don't have that catch-all of Snorlax. Now, some players would argue that Mewtwo is better, and Mewtwo is crazy good. It is the best of the Ubers, for sure. But like, think of the other Ubers. You can count them on one hand. It's funny. Mew, which is a good Pokemon for sure, but nothing earth-shattering. Celebi, which good Pokemon, but it's just running Leech Seed and Heal Bell and Recover. It's not exactly. It slows the game down. It doesn't really shatter anything. Ho-Oh, great Pokemon, but only 8 Sacred Fire PP really hurts it. Lugia's good, but it has that the Ho-Oh problem where its stab move only has 8 PP. Like Curse, Aeroblast, Whirlwind, Recover Lugia is insane. It's the best Snorlax counter in the game because it's Spike's immune, it's crazy bulky, reliable recovery, everything. But it's not much of an immediate threat because it can't go around spamming Aeroblast. You'll run out of PP almost immediately. People have actually suggested don't ban Snorlax, unban Celebi and Ho-Oh. The argument is, how is Snorlax in OU when Celebi and Ho-Oh are clearly worse than it, and they're in Ubers? And at the end of the day, people decide, well, the tier is better without them around. Even if they're not broken, even if they're not, even probably not even top 2, honestly, Zapdos would still be better. Even if they're not that, then you still don't want them in the tier because they would affect it negatively. In an ideal world where Gen 2 was the current gen, then you probably would get rid of Snorlax, and then you would get rid of Zapdos, of course. But that's if Gen 2 was current gen. And when Gen 2 was current gen, and even Gen 3, then there was not a democratic tiering process. That was introduced in Gen 4. And in Gen 2, it was pretty much, whatever we feel like goes. The people who were aware of competitive Pokemon on the internet was, pretty low. You had to do some, you had to get pretty lucky with your Googling and your searching on great movesets on GameFAQs and stuff like that. The earlier gens having this kind of whatever we feel like goes approach coincides with lower power levels and fewer threats. So that kind of idea of we don't really need to ban much just happens to work out pretty nicely when you're not dealing with things that are, dropping Draco Meteors in metagames without fairy types, for example. I realize what this sounds like to what in our current day we would consider our, refined, sophisticated ideas of what competitive Pokemon would be. And you'd be like, oh, well, those players clearly didn't know what they were talking about. It's like, yeah, okay, maybe they didn't have tiering. But I want to stress, these players who played back then were very, very good. And it's their tiering ideas that are different. So I just want to dispel the notion that these were a bunch of idiots who didn't know any better. These were the best players around, and they just didn't feel like tiering stuff because they would rather just deal with it. It was all about demonstrating skill above anything else. To them, it was no different from beating the opponent through prediction. Well, I'm going to beat this broken Pokemon just by being good. It was the same idea. They wanted to do that as opposed to taking the easy way out and getting rid of it because it was too whatever. So that's why Snorlax wasn't banned then. Here's the biggest part. GSC is one of the most competitive, skill-oriented OU metagames there has ever been. And this was another factor, like, why would we ban Snorlax? The metagame is great. And, nowadays we would say, well, the metagame might be better without it. And that would be a more modern version of tiering. But back then it was like, what are you talking about? Let's play the game. The metagame is fine. It's very skill-oriented. Because, yes, Snorlax has 100% usage, and that's unthinkable nowadays. Now, make no mistake, there is a stereotype that Gen 2 is all stall. This could not be further from the truth. If, in fact, stall is struggling to keep up with offense, and this has been the case for years, people have tested Laxless GSC before. Like, just out of curiosity, they've held tournaments with it banned, and they pretty much all turned into the thing people think GSC is. You know how I just said everyone thinks GSC is stall? Yeah, well, you remove Snorlax and GSC really is all stall. Because people think, oh, well, Snorlax is a wall, it takes hits from everything.
But it also hits really hard, doesn't
But
it?
it's also offense, exactly. Like even stall teams, they use Snorlax not because they need its walling prowess. They've got a bunch of other walls for that, but because they need a Pokemon to actually hit back. And Snorlax being able to check so many things while hitting back in return is really important. It is kind of this catch-all to the slew of offensive threats that would otherwise run you over, because it's checking everything from Zapdos to Vaporeon to whatever half decent special attacker out there, like Espeon or whatever. It's not a hard counter, but it does help check them very well. Way better than most offensive teams in most generations could afford. So what happens when you remove Snorlax? Well, if you want to run offense, then you no longer have the ability to switch into anything like at all. Like even something as simple as Nidoking suddenly becomes a million times tougher to deal with. And like you could say, oh well, Raikou is a good special wall too, but Raikou isn't checking things like Nidoking, and it still does not have anywhere near the raw hit-taking capability of Lax. Pretty much what happens is you can't run frail offensive teams reliably at all. So you pretty much are forced into running stall teams if you want any sense of stability whatsoever. It seems like it stifles diversity, but in reality, Snorlax +5 is a lot more diverse than no Snorlax and any random 6, because if you actually want to check things, then you are going to get forced to use Blissey instead, pretty much.
Right. So basically, Snorlax +5, like you said, is more diverse than like being forced to run the same stall core, essentially.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, maybe if you got rid of Snorlax and Zapdos, then you might be better off. But I mean, at least Snorlax-less tournaments have been played before. Those have some precedent, because there are a lot of really scary special attackers in Gen 2. You don't think of Gen 2 as a gen with a lot of special attacking power, but it has way better moves than the physical side of the spectrum. Better boosting options, more well-distributed. Lots of really strong and fast Pokemon. Most of the physical attackers are not fast. And they're really threatening, and it's pretty much just Snorlax's presence that prevents them from running everything over. So you get rid of Snorlax, and it's lights out. And in fact, this is why you can't just chuck Snorlax on a team and counter everything either, because people will take advantage of it. And that's a lot of why GSC has moved more towards offense in the last few years. You say, oh, well, Snorlax is just this offense-stifling fiend. And then you realize, oh, well, my Snorlax just got ruined by insert one of many, many methods. And now I'm getting run over by all these special attackers. That's why offense is the best now, because it's so consistent at doing that.